Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Good crowd. Good to see you guys. Who here has driven on Adamo Drive? Who's driven on Adamo Drive out on the east side of town? What if I told you there was no road called Adamo Drive? I'm going to start by blowing your mind. This will be fun. Because it's named for an Army doctor named Frank Adamo. And when I tell you who he was, you might be a little embarrassed that you've been calling it what you've been calling it all this time. Lieutenant Colonel Adamo ran an Army hospital at Bataan during World War II. And I see some nods back there if you know about World War II. Some of the most fierce fighting the Americans faced in the entire war was at Bataan in the Philippines. But that is where he was his brightest. Dr. Adamo was amazing. His hospital ran short on supplies. And to deal with that, he invented a new treatment for gangrene. Now, gangrene had cost over the centuries millions of soldiers, millions of limbs, many of them their lives. And it stopped with Dr. Adamo. He figured out how to treat it, how to save limbs, how to save lives in the middle of this medical field hospital. He was recognized with a major award. Since he was still deployed, his wife actually received the award from a general here in Tampa while he was away. But the invading Japanese captured Bataan and captured Dr. Adamo. So while he was being recognized here in the United States, he became a prisoner of war. Went through the death march of Bataan and went through and into one of the worst POW camps in the Pacific Theater. It was a nightmare. And he was sick, suffered from beriberi and other diseases, but everyone else was sicker, so he didn't have time to care. And I'm going to show you, this is a picture of Dr. Adamo when he was a kid. He did not look, this is when he was a young man living in Ybor City. He did not look like this later on. When he was treating gangrene, he was much older. Didn't matter. The Army called him and he decided he was going in. And so he was captured, and while at Bataan, he treated not only all these Americans suffering from these awful diseases, but he treated the Japanese as well. And he exchanged his medical services for things that people needed in the camp, like a can of peaches and things that they couldn't get access to. Incredibly selfless, rationing out his own food to patients that he knew could make it if they just had a little more. Dr. Adamo lived like this for 3 years until the Americans finally came back and recaptured the Philippines and set him free. And when Dr. Adamo came back to his hometown, and you can see there, listed as missing, Mrs. Adamo notified. This was in the Tampa Tribune. When he finally came home, after 3 years in internment, they threw a parade for Dr. Adamo in Ybor City, in his hometown, and down through Tampa. And they renamed one of the main streets in his town in his honor, and that is Adamo or Adamo Drive. So that's the sort of thing that I get to stumble on in doing my series. I really, you can get an idea of why I love it. You never know around what corner you're going to uncover some amazing, fascinating story. And I've been fortunate now to be doing this for a while. Somebody asked me what my most surprising story I've done was. And the answer is, it was the 5th one. Because I was approved to do 4. I was approved to do 1 month of weekly stories. And it got done, and the boss was like, well, you're not going to stop. And that was 3 years ago. So my 1 month hitch turned into 3 years, and I'm still going strong, and I've got some folks from my station who are with me at 10 News who I really appreciate. They've been very supportive of my series, and it's a lot of fun. I want to show you something that is kind of neat that I got last month. It's exciting. Look at that. All right. Pointy wings. So this is an Emmy. It's a regional Emmy, and I entered, why do they call it that, with the support of my station up against everything in the southeastern U.S. And they managed to pick my piece as one of the winners. So I was really excited to kind of get this and put it on the shelf and poke my finger with it. It's kind of neat. So I've got this. You know, I'm very humble about it, so I'm just going to set it here during the presentation. Is that the series of one particular episode? This was, and that's a great question. So this was awarded for a montage of pieces I put together. And I know some of you have not seen the series that I do in the morning. Some of you have. But to give you a flavor of it, what I want to do is show you the 4-piece montage, 4 stories back to back, that actually got recognized with the Emmy. I think it gives a good cross-section of what I do when I set out to tell the stories of the places and icons in Tampa Bay, stuff that you may not have known about or may not have thought of in that particular way, and make it interesting.
Why do they call it holiday? Banks. They decide whether you can buy your dream home. Some people say they decide the bills Congress passes. And 45 years ago, bankers at a boardroom table decided this community would be called Holiday. In the 1960s, the folks at, deep breath here, the First Federal Savings and Loan Association of Tarpon Springs, were planning a new branch office. It would be north of Tarpon Springs, but south of Newport Richey. It was an area of West Pasco County with plenty of people, but, no name. So Bank President Bill Boyd pulled out a map and perused some of the street names here, looking for inspiration. Thankfully, he did not take a liking to Lomi Lomi Drive, Speck Drive, or Reggie Drive.
Have a good night and do take care.
Sorry, Reg. The street name that eventually caught his eye? Well, here's a hint. Another hint. One more hint. Okay. It's Holiday Drive.
The bankers thought, Holiday Branch, that has a nice ring to it. So they stuck it on the side of their building and then started pushing everyone in the area to use that name.
It caught on with some upfront marketing. The bank handed out 1,000 front license plates, proudly proclaiming Holiday, Florida. Eventually, the post office started using it. This unofficial name had become official. Their joyful name has lasted to today. In fact, it's lasted longer than the bank. The First Federal, whatever you want to call it, was bought out by another savings and loan in 1987. It no longer exists. Why do they call it that? Now you know. Grayson Kamm, 10 News. Why do they call it Hooters?
Every guy dreams when you're traveling to open a joint, and ours was to open a joint we couldn't get kicked out of.
So nearly 30 years ago, Ed Drosty and 5 other businessmen, none with restaurant experience, bought a building, a dive, along Gulf to Bay Boulevard in Clearwater.
We were certainly crazy. Nothing had ever succeeded in this place before, nothing. And that was kind of a challenge too, especially when everyone reminded us of that.
They cooked up success from scratch, learning on the fly. Here is their recipe for what's now around 450 restaurants. First ingredient, 1 pound of chicken wings.
Wings were things other people threw away. They were 20, 30 cents a pound.
Then add equal parts neighborhood hangout and beachside bar.
No one had ever done that.
Stir, then serve promptly with a side of ladies.
Put the famous Hooters girls on the floor, and that kind of brought the edgy, meets neighborhood joint, and I think that was part of the success.
Oh, you want me to define success? Well, okay.
In a year, 60 million customers will go through a Hooters door.
This original location on Gulf to Bay served as the model for all the rest.
Over the years, this original restaurant in Clearwater has been remodeled, but they kept the bar and reused it for other counters. And in the new space, they've built a gift shop and a museum to chronicle the history of Hooters.
What we have here is the original Hooters outfit that actually lasted for about 2 or 3 weeks and then evolved to the traditional, iconic Hooters grill outfit that is, in 450 restaurants around the world. That actually is, you would probably call it my costume. Out of desperation with no customers, I donned that and went out in traffic and nearly got hit 3 or 4 times, but actually waved a few folks in.
And this name, one that folks still can't take their eyes off of, came from a stroke of inspiration from who? Comedian Steve Martin. The chain's founders had seen a routine of his a lot like this one.
I believe it's derogatory to refer to a woman's breasts as boobs, jugs, Winnebagos, or golden bozos. And you should only refer to them as Hooters.
Aha! So, the word Hooters on the shirt does refer to, what's underneath, right?
There is a reference or a connotation that some will make. We don't push it, we don't deny it, for those that get a kick out of a little tongue-in-cheek, they go with it, but we try not to push it in anybody's face, so to speak.
Yeah, so to speak. Why do they call it that? Now you know. Grayson Kamm, 10 News. Why do they call it Franklin Street? Well, let's see here. Benjamin Franklin invented bifocals, helped found the USA, and convinced the French to help us kick some British backside. Oh, and he confirmed lightning is made of electricity.
Oh my God!
So it's not shocking One of downtown Tampa's streets is a brick-paved place of praise for this pioneering printer, postmaster, and patriot. There you go. That's the story. No. That's not where this tale ends. It's where we begin.
He comes into your heart. He helps guide you. He gives you extra strength. He gives you extra power to live the Christian life.
Because it's where he began.
All the agony of the ages will come to an end. All the tears will be wiped away.
Billy Graham. He's one of the most electric preachers the earth has ever seen, and he started his evangelical life, his worldwide series of sermons, on the sidewalks of this Tampa street.
It was pretty seedy. There was some kind of low-rent hotels and theaters and things like that, and it was kind of called Skid Row.
That's Rodney Kitepow, curator of history at the Tampa Bay History Center.
Billy Graham knew that, and he wanted to try and change these people's lives.
Wait, Billy Graham grew up on a farm in North Carolina. Why was he here?
Billy Graham went to school in Temple Terrace. He went to the Florida Bible Institute. He arrived in 1937. He graduated in 1940.
This is the 18th green at the Temple Terrace Golf and Country Club. You can imagine a lot of people have screamed at God from here. But Billy Graham said this is the spot where God spoke to him and told him to preach to the world.
And Jesus said, your sins are forgiven. I'm asking you tonight to receive Christ as your Lord.
If you think stadiums and TV networks are impressive venues after starting with just Franklin Street's derelicts and drunks, you've got to check out Billy Graham's earliest audience. All the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky.
Before he was preaching in front of the homeless, he was preaching to alligators and birds on a little island in the Hillsborough River by Temple Terrace. And so he wanted to sharpen those oratory skills before he got in front of people.
Hey kids, maybe you should practice your public speaking in front of Fido, because man, that warm-up with an animal audience has taken him far. From Truman to Obama, Graham spent time with 12 presidents. In all, Billy Graham spread the gospel in person to nearly 215 million people.
God commands all people everywhere to repent, the scripture says.
That incredible total ended in 2006 with this, his last public sermon. And it began here, with people who needed a jolt from above on Franklin Street. Why do they call it that? Now you know. Grayson Kamm, 10 News. Why do they call him Raymond? He's funny. He's sly. He's huggable. He is really blue. But what is he?
A furry little bear. What is he, Bianca? He's a woolly mammoth. No, really, seriously?
I don't know what he is. So Raymond, what exactly are you? Okay, that's a C. I see a C. C. Oh, sea dog. It's a dog that lives in the sea. Okay, it makes sense because I heard your story. I guess you started out in the Gulf of Mexico, swimming around doing your thing, and then you saw fishermen. Was that? You saw fishermen who worked for this new baseball team, the Rays, and they fed you a hot dog, and you were hooked. They did a little audition, tested your dancing skills, make sure you could Macarena properly, and promised you all the hot dogs you could eat. That sounds like a deal.
Raymond, the character, has been with the team doing this since day one, 14 years ago, even though there have been a few changes with folks behind the scenes. And he's always been blue, even though the team's colors were not blue until 2008.
So, my friend, do you have a favorite game, a favorite memory, something you love? 1, 6. It's 62, 162, game 162. End of the regular season. Evan Longoria's game-winning homer.
That ball, it's gone! And the Rays win it! A line drive home run by Evan Longoria. And the Rays storm the field.
Total disbelief at the end of game 162.
Legend has it those fishermen who found this canine of the deep created his name Raymond from the team's name, the Devil Rays. He does more than just bound through the bleachers. He makes big blue appearances at 200-plus community events each year.
Hitter number 29.
Sure, he has some issues with authority figures.
Got my bodyguard here now. You know, he don't like people mess with me. Watch out, Raymond.
But this sea dog is really all about being everybody's best friend. Why do they call it that? Now you know. Grayson Kamm, 10 News.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that. Raymond, doesn't talk, but Raymond does text. So I texted Raymond, and he was very excited to find out that we won the Emmy. So he was pretty thrilled about that. Really great guy. So you can see the range of things I cover, and a lot of people ask, where do I get the ideas for this, and how do I come up with this stuff? And really, the bulk of the ideas came when I got the first green light to do the series, and I sat down and I brainstormed for a day, and I came up with this list. And to go back a little further, the series itself, the origin of all this started when I was working as a reporter in Jacksonville, and I got this thing in my brain to do a story about the pronunciation of things. They have some issues with pronunciation up there in Northeast Florida, like Ribault High School, which is named for Jean Ribault, that kind of thing. So as I'm researching this, trying to find good pronunciations, I heard this great story. There's back when the English took over Florida from the Spanish, they sent map makers out to try to make things more proper in proper English. So they changed the names of things. The Rio de San Juan became the St. John's River, things like that. So these guys were going over this little creek down in Clay County south of Jacksonville, and they're going over the map and they see it there, and it's Rio, which means river or creek, so Rio, and then Blanco, which of course sounds like black, so they called it Black Creek. And it was White Creek. So they literally changed the name of the creek entirely and the entire purpose. And I realized the power of this. Then a few years later, I was here in Tampa. We were coming up with ideas. A producer that I worked with on the morning show named Mike Aquilia and I had seen a series that did some similar stuff to this out of a station in Pennsylvania. I pitched the idea. They gave me the green light to do 4 stories, 1 month. And again, that was 3 years ago. So it's tough to keep up now. So I have a list. And Rodney, who works with me on the series, had not actually even seen the list until tonight. Here's the list. It's not short. So these are all the places that I want to do. The dark green ones are on the right are places that I have done. Yeah, that's Mons Venus there. I got to do a story on it. Don't you want to know? It'll be tasteful, I promise. You saw Hooters. It was almost tasteful. It was as tasteful as Hooters is. And then I have other color codes to remind me of certain things I want to do. You can see I have it split up by the county, and there's all these places in Pinellas I want to do, down through other places, Disney World, Citrus County. So this is the list that I pull from, and I keep adding to it because I have a lot from the brainstorming, but then people email me ideas. I have friends who text me like, so dude, I'm in Hernando County and I just saw this thing, and they text it to me. If I'm ever having a conversation with you and I stop what I'm doing and I just start emailing myself, that's what I'm doing. That's how I keep track of these ideas. I email myself and then I go back later and I add them in. And so I have restaurants over there on the right. Those are different restaurants. I did 4 restaurants that were born in Tampa Bay already. Hooters, Outback, which is right on Henderson, is the original. I did, anybody back there help me out? I'm trying to remember. Well, the biggest surprise of all was Red Lobster, which started in Lakeland. Who knew that? I knew that after I researched it. And one more restaurant that I'm spacing on. What's that? Carrabba's did not start here. It's actually the only one of the Bloomer brands that didn't start out in Texas. But you see Bonefish, that started in St. Pete. And it's so cool because I get to meet the people who founded these restaurants. Like I met one of the founders of Outback, and she's telling me about how they opened and no one came. And yes, Outback, that people wait in line for in every city in America, no one showed up. They invited their friends to sit in the window seats and fill the parking lot until people would show up. And how no one of the founding group had ever been to Australia. They just thought it sounded really neat. They didn't want to do a Western style steakhouse. And they're like, all right, show the Outback. It's like Western, but upside down. Sure. And they picked that. And then they tried to launch a seafood restaurant, and they failed, and they failed. And finally, one of the partners called. And they're like, you guys are meeting me here for dinner tomorrow night. Like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm at a place in St. Pete. There are 2 locations. It's called Bonefish Grill. You guys have got to come try this place out. It's amazing. I think we can partner with these guys. And now they're like 350 across the country. So these are the kinds of people. And the amazing thing is they're our neighbors. These are our people that we know, that live down the street from us, and it's really extraordinary the opportunities I get to meet. So certain things come here. The Gerber baby, I don't know if she's still alive, but she lived here in Tampa Bay for a while. So some of these are kind of crazy ideas. Some are more like I want to do one on the Tampa 2 defense football we invented. Why not? Because eventually, if I get to do this for 10 years, we're going to be digging pretty low. So that's my list, and that's where I kind of came up with the idea to keep track of things. The other big question that I get from people is, how does this all come together? How do I do all this? So for that, I will need volunteers. You don't have to say anything, but you do have to stand up. And please, will you stand? Thank you. You, my friend, are going to be research. There you go. Who's next? Come on, somebody stand up, please. There we go, John. You're going to be right. Please stand here. There we go. Oh, please, 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 please. Yes, yes, yes. You will be shoot. There you go. The camera kind of shoot. If you'd like to stand right here. If you guys want to stand in a row, that would be great. Kind of there, it's perfect. Okay, Rodney is going to be Rodney. I'm Rodney. You're Rodney. Come on over. And while he's moseying, Edit. Who wants to be Edit? One of my friends? One of my colleagues? Oh, will you be Edit? Nope. Please, you're my friend now. There you go. You said yes. There's Rodney. And who wants to be Finish? Who wants to be the end? Big. Oh! Come. Come. There we go. There we go. So you can hold them up, and you guys can space out a little bit if you want to come down here. Kind of if you want to lead this way. Okay. So everyone can see, you can see we got the research right. So generally, I think I put this in the right order. This is the order in which I do things. I start out with researching something. I'll find a name on my list, or somebody will email me, and I'll want to dig into it. Usually, so I'm not a historian. Like, I'm a storyteller, so you won't see me every day at the library, like pulling through the old books. Like, if a reliable reporter has done a story on it, or if Rodney or one of the other sources give it to me, I generally will trust with it. If it's a shaky thing, I'll tell you in the story. Like, the best we can find out is this. So I researched the story. Then, and this is different from usual, I will sit down and usually write the story, because you can see I kind of try to do weird things and get creative, and if I do that at the end, it'll get all mixed up, so I'll write the story now. Then I'll generally go shoot the video for the story to match what I wrote. Most news does not work this way. If we did the story about the home invasion where I wrote it first before we went to it, it would not be productive. People would not enjoy it. So it's sort of a mix from what we normally do. Then I will go to Rodney, who's my main man, my source, the curator here at the History Center, who is full of knowledge and also books that are full of knowledge. So between the two, we can usually figure out what we have going on. And Rodney, I'll often have a script kind of already lined up. And so I'll go to Rodney, and Rodney will sort of be like, what do you want me to talk about? Which normally, in news, we don't do that. I don't tell the mayor what to say. But here, I don't tell him either, but I give him a topic. I'll say, okay, we want to talk about how springs were a huge recreational place in Tampa for generations. And he can elaborate on that. I'm like, well, tell me more about the pollution. And then that'll plug into my story. I'll tweak my story. Then I will edit my story, because I shot it already. So now I edit it. Thank you. You're doing a wonderful job. Which means actually sitting down. This is, as you can see, all the different graphics and shots and everything. This is one of the most time-consuming parts of it. I squeeze this part in a lot. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Jill Kelly. But I was part of the illustrious team of high-caliber journalists who parked out front of her house for 2 days. And let me tell you how exciting that was. So between runs of the FedEx guy up to her front door that we all had to stop and stare at, I edited one of my stories just sitting in the truck. So I got to do a lot of work on that. And then finishing, which you're doing a great job at as well. This is all the stuff that I think in my head is going to take 5 minutes, but actually takes like an hour and a half. I have to put together a tease. Coming up next. You know, why do they call it that? No, you know. Got to do a coming up next thing. I've got to write what we call the intro and the tag, which are the elements that the anchor says before and after my story. So that stuff I write generally for this story, so it kind of all flows together. And then I have to put together a story that's on the web, and I put links together. And then I do things very differently. So, okay, Rodney, come with me. Come on over here. So sometimes I'll research something and I'll go right to Rodney because I have no idea what it is about and I can't find anything about. So then I go to Rodney, then I sit down and write it, and then I shoot it, edit. But sometimes, if you'll come with me, sometimes it makes most sense to shoot it. I don't research always first. Shoot it here. I was thinking about putting you up here, but that's crazy. So sometimes I'll be at a place, like I'm at the airport and I have my camera and I have an hour. I'll do one on the airport. So I sit down and I shoot it, and then I call Rodney. Rodney, tell me there's something interesting about the airport. Please. Please. And he'll tell me about Drew Field and how it was a farmer who founded it and how it was a pockmarked kind of grass strip, and then the military was ramping up for World War II, and they came in and bought it and improved it. Then they built a road to connect it to MacDill, and boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, I have a story that then I write, and then I edit, and then I finish. So yes, okay, so shoot Rodney. Sometimes Rodney's not there. No, shoot Rodney. It's an important safety tip. But sometimes, let me switch you two, if you would. If you want to go there, come here. Sometimes I get all the way here, and I discover something, which is what happened to me on one of the weirdest discoveries I had. I was working on a story about Kenneth City. Have you guys seen the sign for Kenneth City? You go on I-275 through Pinellas County, you see a sign. What kind of a place is Kenneth City? But there it is, Kenneth City. Well, it's my job to find out what is the deal with Kenneth City. So I look it up. It was a developer. I found out about the name. I wrote up a good version of it. I checked my facts with Rodney. I went out, I shot the video, and I went to edit. And I was trying to pull up something, and I was looking up something about it, and the guy who founded it was named Sidney Colin. And so I went and I looked at his name, and not only did he found Kenneth City, but he founded On Top of the World, which is a retirement community. There's a small one in Clearwater and a really big one in Ocala that you see on 75 if you're going to Gainesville. And so I looked at On Top of the World, and I clicked in, and the president of On Top of the World is Kenneth Colin. The dude is alive. Kenneth is a person, and he's alive, and I must talk to him. And I went all Moby Dick. I'm like, I must acquire Kenneth Colin. I must have it for my collection. So I went nuts. I called constantly. I was on first name basis with his secretary, Samantha. She's lovely. She really is sweet. And she came up with more creative ways to turn me down than I have ever heard, than I heard in high school, frankly. So I went on and on and on. I mean, for months. Every couple of weeks, hi Samantha, it's Grayson. Has Kenneth changed his mind? No, okay, bye-bye. So finally, I got the green light to drive to Gainesville and do a Why Do They Call It That on the Swamp, on Ben Hill Griffin Stadium at UF. I also did Doak Campbell Stadium, for those of you who don't know. I'm an equal opportunity storyteller. And I'm driving by On Top of the World, and it's just staring at me. It's just there. I got to do this. I got to get this. So I'm pestering, and finally I get the green light to talk to Kenneth. And I roll in, and there he is. It's him and his mustache. He brought his mustache, which was nice. I felt like I could do a separate interview with the man's mustache. It was intense. But he explained the reason he doesn't. You guys are still standing. You can sit if you'd like. Thank you. Big round of applause, please, for our helpers. Thank you. And I'll come back over here. The reason Kenneth doesn't like to talk about it is because he really believes that teams are how things get done. He's a true deep believer in that he feels like it's a collaboration of people that accomplish anything. And he learned that from his dad. And so he wasn't about to go be like, yeah, my name's on the thing, whatever. But I convinced him to talk to me. He looked at some of the stories online. He felt like I'd do a good job. And here is the reason Kenneth City exists, and it's a fascinating one. He told me there's also another development somewhere in Pinellas County called Lake Elizabeth. His sister's name's Elizabeth. His name's Kenneth. Their dad named his development projects after his kids so he wouldn't cut corners. He felt like if he tried to shortchange somebody or do something that he wouldn't want to be done, he felt like he needed to answer to his kids. So by naming it after his kids, they kept him honest. And it's something that he carried through in his development and is carried through in his life. So it was really fascinating to meet Kenneth and actually do the interview. And he was very glad he did it. He said that he really liked the story. Excuse me. So that was neat. I got to meet Kenneth. The coolest person I had a chance to meet doing this series was Leroy Selman. What a guy. For my 50th place, I hit the big 5-0, which Rodney is 30 years away from, right, Rodney? Yeah. So I hit my 50th place, and I decided I wanted to do something special. And so I lined up an interview with Leroy Selman. He had a restaurant. Who knew? We'll do it there. And I need another volunteer. This is a family show. Uncle Crew, can you stick out your finger for me real quick? I promise. I promise.
My dad used to do
I promise, nothing bad. Shaking hands with Leroy Selman was like this. This is what it was like to shake hands with Leroy Selman. The man engulfed you. He was monstrous and gigantic and intimidating and the nicest dude I have ever met in my life. He had a magical power. I mean magical. When you talked to Leroy Selman, there was nothing more important in the world to him than what you were talking about with him. I mean, I was talking about a street, and he was enraptured. He was locked in. Everything else stopped. I mean, the guy has a restaurant named after him, running a foundation, football Hall of Famer. None of it mattered. None of it mattered. He just wanted to talk to me about this because it was important to me. And the guy was amazing, magical, and funny. Funny. He said people ask him all the time whether he gets a cut from the tolls on the Selman Expressway. He said no check. And the story of how that came to be, he made it into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And some of the guys at 970 WFLA were talking about how they need to honor him. Something needs to be done to celebrate this man. And they realized that Crosstown is a very boring name for a road. One caller suggested it, and they went on a campaign, and within 2 years, it was done. And Leroy said it was very uncomfortable for him. He said because he always thought, oh, no, go back. No, go back. There we go. He always thought that, you needed, he said in his words, like, I thought you needed to be passed on to have an honor like that. And this was, of course, he didn't know what was coming, but he was like, if you know something I don't know, tell me. But he was flattered by it, and he considered it one of his greatest honors. He said his greatest fear in life was getting a ticket on the Selman Expressway. Which is pretty funny. But he said of all the honors, he said he felt like this was one of the most distinctive, kinds of things for a community to really to put his name on something, and it was really cool. And I'll sidebar off my script here for a second because I did hear another really interesting story from Leroy about how Rhodes made him want to stay in Tampa Bay, which was really fascinating. So Leroy gets drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and his brother Dewey got drafted by the Buccaneers. Two brothers drafted together, moving to Tampa in their big old 1970s car, and they're driving over by Tampa Stadium. They want to go check it out. It's an NFL stadium. They want to go see it, and they're driving on Himes, and lo and behold, there are two streets next to each other, right by the stadium, Leroy and Dewey. Next to each other. Swear, they're parallel streets. I can't believe this. We have not played a down of football in this town, and they've already named two streets after us. There's something special about this town. I think I could stay in a place like this. Of course, they've been named that for 40 years, and they had no idea, and they later found out. But he said that was one of the first moments when he realized that this wasn't just like his first job. This could be where he goes and lives and makes an impact, which was a pretty cool thing to hear from Leroy Selman, and one of those touching things. And occasionally, I get to meet another cool person. We're going to go county by county now. We're going to do county by county. If this were the TV station, we'd have a cool, whooshy graphic, but we don't have that. I have old maps. Hillsborough County used to look like that, not making this up. You can see, some boundaries and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty cool. We weren't always really good at the map thing. But yeah, that's Charlotte Harbor there, Sarasota, all the way up till it ran into, I think at the time, Hernando County, which is up there in Greene, up north of Weeki Wachee. So Hillsborough had some turf, and of course all of Pinellas County as well for a long time, up until about 100 years ago. So, Hillsborough County, who here's from Hillsborough County? Where are my Hillsborough County people? They're out there, good. How do you say the name of that one road that is up by USF and North Tampa? B-E-A-R-S-S. Bears. I got Bears. So.
The Bears.
Exactly, the Bears. So I actually know because I actually found and interviewed Marty Bierce of Bierce Groves, whose great-grandfather was the minister who actually moved to North Tampa from Missouri, started a church in 1894, the Reverend I.W. Bierce, and founded the church after an 11-week mule trip from Missouri, which has got to be almost as much fun as getting up at 2:30 in the morning. So I asked Marty, explain the name, dude. Everybody wants to know. And he said, well, people would see B-E-A-R and they think bear, so why not bear? So he's like, but if I have a B-E-A-R-D on my face, is it a beard? No, it's a beard. Name's Bierce. Rhymes with fierce. Never forget that. So Marty was really nice to talk to me about it, and those are the kinds of people I get to meet on my thing. Next county up, Pinellas County. Any Pinellas County people? Where are my Pinellas peeps? I know I got a few in the back there. Pinellas peeps, thanks for making the trip. I appreciate it. So does anybody recognize this beautiful state park? Honeymoon Island. Yeah? That's nice, huh? Honeymoon Island sitting out there in the Gulf. Beautiful island. Horrible name. Because it was originally called Hog Island. This is classy, makes you really want to take the kids out there on a Sunday, huh? So that was Hog Island, and then in 1939, a developer from New York showed up and built a little village hut love thing. It was really kind of strange. He built these thatched huts, 50 of them, and a runway out on this island that you couldn't get to except by boat. And there you go, look, a little street, little seaplane. Yeah. A great place to spend your week, huh? And he targeted this development at honeymooners as the perfect place to come spend a rustic week away in Florida. Obviously, your costs were kind of low because there wasn't a lot to do. And as you can see by the sign indicating that is the Lover's Nook, they took their honeymoon business seriously and saved lots on construction materials. And so Honeymoon Island was created, and even though this development completely flopped, it kept the name, which is pretty classy. All right, next one up, Polk people. Any Polk people? Polk County people? I'll pretend I saw some hands up. Yay, Polk. There's an old picture of Polk County. The wonder of Frostproof. You guys have heard of Frostproof? A little bit of a head scratcher on this. Now, how do you get a town named Frostproof? You lie to your friends. That is how you get a town named Frostproof. So the guys in early Frostproof, which was, I think, even a little smaller than the Frostproof in this picture, decided that they needed a post office. You know, getting a post office back then was like getting internet access for the first time. It meant that you didn't have to go to Fort Meade now, which was, you know, a day trip there and back just to get a package or get mail. So they really got together. The guy was going to be the postmaster. Everybody, like the 18 people in town, sat down. They all agreed on the name. It's on a ridge right between two lakes, so they came up with Lakemont. Not Frostproof. Lakemont. This is a catchy name. It's fine. Joe Carson thought Lakemont was a terrible name. Joe Carson had a marketing mind. He wanted people up north to dream of coming to a place where your crops will never fail, you'll never be cold, a place that is frostproof. So he wanted the name Frostproof, but he lost the vote. So he volunteered to take the application and deliver it to the post office in Fort Meade to file it. And on the way to the post office, he scratched out Lakemont and wrote in Frostproof. So like 2 months later, the new postmaster gets his envelope and he's so excited. Congratulations, you are the new postmaster of Frostproof, Florida. What in the world? But it stuck. It stuck. Enough people, I guess, were swayed by it. Probably also was a bureaucratic nightmare to change it. So they stuck with Frostproof, and it remains Frostproof-ish now. They still do have a citrus industry, but they have had freezes, so it's more like frost-resistant, I would say, would be the way to look at it. Any Pasco people? Any Pasco people join us? Yay, Pasco. Okay. So this is one of the weirder ones. San Antonio, which is out by St. Leo University. It's a cool little town. There's another small village named San Antonio in Texas, apparently. So there was this guy, Judge Edmund Dunn, who was lost in the desert in Arizona. Lost. And Judge Dunn decided that he was going to pray to the patron saint of lost things, which at the time was him. And he prayed to St. Anthony of Padua, saying, I have a lost thing that is me. And if you could get me not lost, I will move to Florida and found a city in your honor. And apparently, St. Anthony was down for the deal because he found his way out of the desert, and he moved to Pasco County and founded San Antonio, which he saw as the ideal, perfect Catholic community. In fact, to make it perfect, if you weren't Catholic, he would not sell land to you. In fact, you had to have a letter from your priest saying you were in good standing to get this man to sell land to you, because back then there were no laws about discrimination in land deals. But there was a free market, and when you limit your city like that, it doesn't do too well. So after 6 years, he bailed on the Catholics-only plan on his own. And San Antonio is still around and still has a big Catholic population there because of that early founding. Hernando County, since we don't have a lot of Pasco people, probably not any Hernando people, but you've got Hernando County there, which, as you can see, used to be quite bigger than it is now. There's Spring Hill right in the middle of it, goes all the way up to the Withlacoochee River and all the way down to what was the Hillsborough and Pinellas line. So they basically cut Pasco out of the bottom of it over the years. So that's Hernando County. And Hernando County has an interesting county seat, which I don't even think is on this map because it was that long ago. It's Brooksville, or Brooksville, if you want. That's how a lot of folks say it. I'm not lying. Some people say it, Brooksville. This guy, Congressman Preston Brooks, thinks this guy, Senator Charles Sumner, insulted his uncle during an anti-slavery speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate. So now I will advance to a picture that you may all remember from your American history books because it's the most violent thing they put in there. That. Ringing a bell? Anybody? So Preston Brooks, he's the mean guy, decided to storm onto the floor of the Senate and commit attempted murder and beat Charles Sumner with his cane so many times that the cane snapped and Sumner couldn't come back to the Senate for 3 years. Their writing desks were bolted to the floor. Sumner had managed to almost pull his out of the ground trying to protect himself. A lot of classy people stood by and let it happen, too. So the man committed attempted murder, tried to kill a member of the U.S. Senate in the Senate floor. So, hero in the South. He was regarded as a hero because at the time, slavery was an issue that had been talked about, and plenty of people wanted to fight over it. They felt like the time for talking had passed a generation ago and we needed an answer. So they felt like he finally put some teeth into the slavery way of life. And in doing that, basically stepped up and beat the man to within an inch of his life. So, for that, Brooksville is named in his honor. So that's fun little trivia on the town. And Tampa. Where are my Tampa people? Yay, Tampa people! I love this old school map. This is really cool. This is, I believe, 1919. That's one of the other cool things. I don't know, anybody map people? People like looking at old maps? Yeah. I just like stare at them. And you can see all sorts of neat things on this. You'll notice Harbor Island here. You notice island missing here, named after some dude named Davis. Just one island. This will come into play later. This is what we call foreshadowing. You'll see this later. But there's so neat things. What's now Kennedy was actually several streets: Lafayette, Grand Central, Memorial Highway, and it became all Kennedy because John F. Kennedy was shot less than a week after parading down that street in Tampa. And so they renamed, it was one of the first things commemorating him in the country. It was renamed in his honor. And it actually solved a geographic issue where you had this one road that had like 3 different names. So even in death, President Kennedy bringing people together. But there's a statue of him that recognizes him right at the front of the entrance to the University of Tampa. If you look, you'll spot it, kind of looking out over the street that's named in his honor. So I could stare at this map and talk about it all day, but I'm going to talk about one thing that's actually not even on this map. Dale Mabry Highway, which is maybe the first head scratcher that people get when they come here. Like, who is this guy with the full name on the street sign? It's named for Captain Dale Mabry. That's Captain Mabry right there. Born in Tallahassee, grew up in Tampa. In fact, the address that's on his card that is paperwork to sign up for the Army is a section of Hyde Park that actually now has the Selman Expressway right through it. But it's kind of right behind like the Walgreens there in Hyde Park is where he had his house where he lived and where he signed up to join the Army Air Corps. This was right after World War I, and aviation was new and exciting, and so he signed up as a dirigible airship pilot. And this was his baby. This was the Roma. That's flying over Norfolk, Virginia. This was an airship that the Italians built that we bought because we wanted to learn from it. And Captain Mabry was in charge of the contingent of people who brought it over from Italy and then were in charge of testing upgrades on it. And you can see there's an American flag hanging off the back. It's kind of weird. It has like almost looks like a biplane wing on the back. That's how they controlled it. Full of hydrogen, which goes boom. Foreshadowing. So it's flying over there. So he's in charge of testing this blimp. And here's another shot of the Roma. It gives you an idea of the scale. Those are tiny little people in this massive thing. Crew of, I think, 45 were in the gondola underneath. And then you have the whole thing. And you can see out there testing it over the field. Well, Captain Mabry was testing new engines and a new control system flying over Norfolk, Virginia. And the airship started to collapse. The whole nose of it started to come in on itself, and it started falling out of the sky. People start dumping bags of weight over the side to try to slow the descent. It just starts auguring toward the ground. People start leaping out from 30, 40 feet in the air trying to survive. It keeps coming to the ground. The Roma crashed and burned. The steel was red hot for hours. It vaporized. 34 people were lost from the crew. And when they went to the controls, they went up to the front, to the gondola. They found Captain Mabry's body still at the controls, still holding on, still trying to right the ship and land it softly, still steering it away from the crowd of people who were on the ground to observe the test. He saved many lives by staying at his post and not trying to bail out. So to honor him, we named Dale Mabry Highway in his honor. There were during the run-up to World War II, there were 2 airfields that the military established. One was MacDill Field, well, there were 3, but in South Tampa. One was MacDill Field down at the Rattlesnake Point area at the end of South Tampa. The other one was Drew Field, which is now Tampa International Airport. They decided they needed a road to connect those 2. And there was a little street, but the Army invested a ton of money into building a brand new highway that could handle heavy equipment, and they named it for one of the sons of Tampa who was a hero who had lost his life. So That's Dale Mabry Highway. That's how it got its name. So I'm going to go through a couple other quick favorites. I'm going to give you a little lightning round. And if you guys have questions, I'll answer them in a minute. I'll go through these real fast, and then I'd love to hear if you want to know anything. I know the ones that I've done, so I can cover those. But a couple of my favorites that I've hit over the years. Waimama, right? Waimama in Hillsborough County, of course, is a Seminole Indian word. That's not true. The developer named it after his daughters, Willie, Maud, and Mary. Waimama. I don't know if he had the ethics that, Kenneth's dad did, but he did name it after his kids, Willie, Maud, and Mary. Another one, Mulberry, and in Polk County, a little town of Mulberry. There were a whole bunch of people there, but there was no town. It didn't have a name like Holiday. It was nameless. And the engineers for the train kept getting annoyed because they kept getting told to drop things off by the mulberry tree along the tracks and pick up this pallet by the mulberry tree. And finally, the name stuck for the town, so they just called it Mulberry. And if you go to downtown Mulberry, by downtown Mulberry, I mean Mulberry. If you go to downtown Mulberry, there is a descendant of that tree still sitting on that spot right by the railroad tracks. It's pretty neat. So that's how Mulberry got its name. Another weird railroad town, Lutz. Lutz is a guy's name, which makes sense, because when you found a town and you can't think of a better name it for yourself. So Lutz was an engineer or conductor who was a staff member on the Orange Belt Railroad, which was the road that Peter Demens built when he founded St. Petersburg. He extended it down from North Florida into the end of Pinellas County. And this guy, Lutz, I don't know, first name something or other. It's a lot to remember. Lutz got permission from the company to establish like a little railroad depot in that spot, and he named it after himself. And it's stuck through all these years as a little community. So that's where Lutz came from. Another little transportation-related footnote in northern Hillsborough County. Who here has spent more than the appropriate amount of time sitting in traffic on Bruce B. Downs? Anybody? Yeah, Bruce B. Downs. Here's the thing about Bruce B. Downs. Bruce Downs, who really never used the B ever, like in his life, is rolling over in his grave. Because Bruce Downs was a transportation planner. And he was renowned as a very good one. He worked for the Florida Department of Transportation for years. His hallmark was building roads to relieve traffic on otherwise congested roads. Alternate routes. That's what Bruce B. Downs was all about. So as you can imagine, it's pretty upsetting. He had left the DOT and he became the Public Works Director for Hillsborough County. And in that job, he was like the #2 guy in the county. And there was an article, the Tampa Tribune actually published an article about how stressful his job was because he was one of the only honest people in an otherwise corrupt county government. This was where we were routinely leading people off to jail. That article was published. That night at dinner, Bruce B. Downs collapsed from a heart attack and died. Pretty crazy. So they named a street in his honor. Sorry, Bruce. They named that street in his honor. It was actually an extension of 30th Street that he had helped pioneer years before. But it was very interesting. I mentioned it to Mike Deason, who's one of our investigative reporters. He's like, oh, I knew Bruce Downs. Never used the B. It's the strangest thing. I'm like, okay, sounds good. So that's the story of Bruce B. Downs. A couple more quick ones. Another guy who never got the love that he deserved, Major Henry Snow. This is one of those civic guys that everybody in town knew, an encouraging guy, really beloved. The Tribune wrote that I think no single person had given more of themselves to the creation of Tampa. Some really great guy. Poor guy, can't get any love. So they decided to name a park after Major Snow after he passes away. They picked the smallest park on the planet. And I'm not just saying this. For decades, Ripley's, believe it or not, had considered Snow Park, which is right by the University of Tampa, right where Grand Central, right here, that. But not all of this. No, that would be too generous. It's like this part. It's a median with a plaque. And that was Snow Park. So he gets the smallest park in the world named after him. But at least you got to figure when the guy passes away that they would do him the honor of a really important obituary, you know, a nice front page headline in the Tampa Tribune. Except the day he died was the same day that the Tribune got news that the multimillionaire founder of Davis Islands, D.P. Davis, had mysteriously gone overboard on a transatlantic voyage in the dark of night from his steamer, never to be seen again. So Major Snow gets bumped. Poor Major Snow. It's a rough life on Major Snow. A couple more quick ones. Davis Islands, with an S, Davis Islands, with an S at the end, just for any confusion. There are actually 2 islands there now. There were 3 islands when it was first dug up from the bay. D.P. Davis, this guy, had made some money in Miami doing development. He decided to come up here to Tampa, and he was going to do the biggest thing, like literally anyone had ever seen. So he spotted this island, this big island, and then, you know, sometimes it was called Big Grassy Key and Little Grassy Key, had different names. Nobody lived there, nobody cared. Didn't really need a good name. It was a bump in the bay. But for him, it was the address. We're gonna have an airport. We're going to have a hospital. We're going to have hotels. It's going to be the coolest, most self-sufficient, rich people thing you've ever seen. In his 1920s, real estate boom's going strong in Tampa. So he gets permission to buy these 2 islands and to create this new island by it. This man was such a promoter that he was literally selling people lots that were underwater. He was selling, people were like looking at a map and they were looking like, now, so my lot is actually Hillsborough Bay right now. Is that, no, yeah, we'll fix that up. We're gonna get you some land, it'll be great. You'll love it. So this guy was selling people land that was underwater. That's how skilled a promoter he was. And Davis Islands was a pretty big success. It was ramping up and doing very well. So he started an even bigger development up near St. Augustine. And the real estate boom collapsed in Florida. The bottom fell out. And everybody started losing money. There was at one point, Rodney, was he due $4 million? One quarter he was due $4 million in mortgage payments and $30,000 showed up. He had a cash flow problem. So, with all his creditors drumming their fingers anxiously on desks and him trying to borrow money on one thing and move things around, he decided to take a little break, a little vacation. I'm going to go on a steamship to Europe. Gets on the sister ship, basically, of the Titanic, about a decade after it had sunk, and the Majestic, and set sail, not with his new wife, but with his mistress, off to Europe, and goes overboard. She, the mistress, was the only one in the stateroom at the time that it happened. And it remains a mystery to this day when he went out the porthole. Was it an accident? Did he kill himself? Was he pushed? Or maybe somebody found out they weren't getting the right cut of the pie or how doomed they were financially. So it remains a mystery to this day. If you have any questions, Rodney is literally the leading expert in the world on this guy, so you can ask him. I ask him everything, so go for it. But it's a fascinating story about D.P. Davis and his disappearance. 2 more quickies, 2 more quick ones here, because I think these are just fun little things that I've stumbled onto. Ballast Point, South Tampa. You guys ever been to the park? Who's been to the park? My little kid's first birthday party there was very exciting. Cookie Monster. It was wonderful. So Ballast Point has been around for a very long time. I mean, I know geographically, like you would, yes, the Earth moves slowly. But no, it's had a name for a long time, because what happens is, as you head into Hillsborough Bay out of Tampa Bay, it gets very shallow, like a bathtub shallow. And ship captains who'd been sailing for a long distance would put weights in their ship. They'd pump water in, or they'd actually put rocks down in the ship to keep it low in the water and stable. Well, if you do that, you're going to run, you know, aground. So when you got to Ballast Point, you would take this stuff that's stored in your ship, which is called ballast, and get it overboard. So you'd lighten the load in the ship, it would have a lower draft, have a higher draft, and could cruise into Hillsborough Bay. That's why Ballast Point got its name many, many years ago. I keep looking at Rodney, because if I get any of these wrong, he'll flag me down. He'll let me know. And one more quick one. Riverview, the Riverview. How many of you live in Riverview? Show me your hand. Okay, good, we got a couple. I know one person lives there. No, I have a friend who lives there, so I know that like her hand's gonna go up. No, good. No, so Riverview should not be there. Riverview, by all accounts, should have vanished long ago. Riverview is, spoiler alert, called that because it has a view of the river. The Alafaya River is right there. Riverview was the late one to the dance. Another town named Peru, P-E-R-U, had been set up on the south side of the Alafaya River, and it was the first one. It was the one that was rocking. Later on, some other people founded Riverview on the north side, but the challenge with that is the river. People who wanted to move from Tampa to Riverview, wanted to commute, wanted to sell stuff, wanted to do these sorts of things, had to get a boat and cross the river to go to Peru. Way too much trouble. So as Riverview grew, Peru literally vanished off of the map. If you go through maps every few years, there's Peru that's a circle and Riverview that's a dot. Then there are 2 circles, and then Peru's a dot, and then Peru is gone. It's so gone that you can stand in Riverview Park, which is right in the middle of what used to be downtown Peru, and never know you were there. P-E-R-U, Peru. Don't ask me. So basically, Riverview's identity sort of swallowed Peru, and now it's on both sides of the river. It's known as Riverview. You can come up to me afterward. I'm around. I have to get to bed eventually because I got to get up at 2:30, but which I know you guys all know because you'll all watch 10 News in the morning show from now until ever. From 5 to 7 a.m. weekdays, Channel 10, special Wednesday. If you guys do want to see the series, it runs on Wednesdays, Wednesday mornings on 10 News. Usually runs in our 6 a.m. hour, usually around 6:15 or so. But if you watch it at 6 a.m. hour, you're pretty much guaranteed to catch it. You can also go to callitthat.com, which I bought for like $8 and redirected it to there. So if you go to callitthat.com, you'll see all the stories as they post up there. What's that? All of them. All of them. Yep. A little time travel for you. All right, so I want to tell you guys one more. So this is Ashley Drive. Who here thinks Ashley Drive is a man's first name? The name for a man's first name? Anybody? Anybody here thinks it's a woman's first name? Name for a woman's first name? Anybody here never thought about it before this very moment? There we go. I love this. That's why you're here, to think about this. Ashley Drive is the last name of not one person, but a couple. And it is one of the coolest love stories you're ever going to hear. So William Ashley was the first city clerk for the city of Tampa, back when it was just a little baby city and just being founded. And they were naming the streets. I mean, that's how old it was. And he lived with a black woman. And not as a slave. I mean, he owned her as a slave. But he lived with her, and they lived together as husband and wife in Tampa in the 1800s. Wrap your head around that. Now wrap your head around this. Most people were okay with it. Shocked me to no end when I found out this story, but this is the truth. They lived together in a loving relationship, in a caring relationship, basically as husband and wife, and the other folks in Tampa knew that it was legitimate and genuine and real, and maybe if not embraced it, at least tolerated it, which is really amazing, an amazing thing. And then the Civil War happened. And it's fascinating because if you look on the census from 1850, you see that William Ashley lived with a female slave named Nancy, who was about the same age. If you look in the 1870s, you see them living together with her as Nancy Ashley, listed occupation cook. So she was free, and they stayed together, and they lived together. And eventually, they passed away, as people do. He died first, and she died afterward. And it was their wishes that they be buried together. And a headstone still stands in Oak Lawn Cemetery. It was erected by, and don't read ahead, I'll give it to you in a second. It was erected by John Jackson. Jackson Street is named for him, one of the early mayors and leaders of the city. He was the executor of the will, and he put together. And as an important leader in the city, he was able to make this happen, even though you've got to imagine this subject made some people uncomfortable. Seeing as, you notice I said they lived together as William and Nancy Ashley. They could not get married, and they couldn't get married in Florida for generations after that. But they lived together. They didn't care. They loved each other, and that's what mattered. And on their headstone that still stands, you can go look at it in the southwest corner, you see, here lies William Ashley and Nancy Ashley, master and servant, faithful to each other in that relation in life. In death, they are not separated. Stranger, consider and be wiser. In the grave, all human distinction of race or caste mingle together in one common dust. It's a pretty profound point, and it's a good one to end with tonight. So thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys. A lot of you guys have been really supportive, especially I've seen my friends and colleagues in the back. You guys have been really supportive of this over the years, and I really appreciate it very much. And my family could not make it. Like, every member of my family has a medical procedure that they're recovering from right now, so they couldn't make it. So to my wife and my mom and my dad, who didn't tell me to stop and maybe even encouraged me, thank you to them too. So thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.